Oh, I can't hear any sound.
Okay, I think we're live now. Welcome, everyone. Can I ask people who are not speaking tonight on the panel to turn off your cameras and your microphones, please? There will be an opportunity at the end for folks to ask some questions, make some comments. And you can, as we're going along, put those in the Facebook chat if you'd like to do that. Okay. So I think we're ready to begin. I want to welcome all of you, fellow Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, to a special public forum about the province's rush into wind hydrogen energy, the impact on people, the unanswered questions, the echoes of earlier mega project mistakes. My name is Tara Manuel. I'm co-chair of EnviroWatch NL. We're an independent, non-profit provincial citizens group formed almost a year ago to bring more transparency and accountability into government decision-making on matters affecting the natural environment. You can become a financial supporter of EnviroWatch NL or an active member of our group, and information as to how to go about that is available on our Facebook page, or at our website at envirowatchnl.com. The other co-chair of EnviroWatch NL is Glenn Wheeler, whom many of you may know from the podcast Mi'kmaq Matters, and that's also streaming this public forum on its Facebook page. So the discussion tonight will also be available for viewing in a week or two on Rogers TV, and we thank Rogers for being here with us tonight and recording the event. And we'll be posting those times on our EnviroWatch Facebook page and our website. Okay, so right off the top, we'd like to state that we do think wind energy is a crucial aspect in reducing emissions and responding to climate change. However, we think it must be built at an appropriate scale and directly benefit the communities which host the projects. The provincial strategy, in our view, is poorly thought out and may actually result in an increase in carbon emissions, which we will discuss. If you'd like to know more about EnviroWatch's position on wind energy, you can read our position paper, and that is available on our website. So right now, I'd like to ask Glenn to introduce the panel, please, and tell the audience about the format for tonight.
Great. Well, thanks, Tara, and welcome everyone. We have three panelists starting as they appear on my screen. In the upper left of my screen, I see Russell Williams, and Russell is an associate professor in the political science department at Memorial University. And on my other side, Tami Park-Tighe, a resident of the Port Au Port Peninsula, and a very active member of the people trying to defend the land and water of the peninsula and area. Nick Mercer is here with us. Nick has roots on this island of Newfoundland and is currently assistant professor at the University of Prince Edward Island in environmental studies and island studies. So we will hear from each of our three speakers, and we'll have some discussion among them. And then we have left lots of time at the end for your questions, comments, interventions, and Hillary McInnes, our producer, will be collecting those and forwarding them to Tara and me, and we will put them on the floor for the panelists and others to discuss. So that's our forum for tonight. Back to you, Tara.
Okay, so we'd like to start the discussion with Russell, but before I ask my question, I'd like to give it a bit of context. So Russell, because this project is furthest ahead in the assessment process, we'll be talking specifically, but not exclusively, about the World Energy GH2 project for the Port Au Port Peninsula and the Codroy Valley. And that consists of more than 330 mammoth turbines to be built by a company that began construction and bought the Port of Stephenville even before the project was approved. Its 4,000-page environmental impact statement that the public has been given about a month and a half to review and provide comments on will be reviewed by a provincial environment department whose staff has been significantly reduced and who have less than 2 weeks to review the public submissions before the minister makes his decision. It's hard to have confidence in how these huge projects are being managed by the government. So, Russell, my question for you is, does the way these wind hydrogen energy proposals are going forward so quickly remind you of the way other mega projects have been rolled out and the privileging of the big over the smaller scale in the province's approach to economic policy? What do you think?
Yeah. So thanks for having me. There's a lot in that question, and that's what we call in the trade a loaded question.
Yeah.
But fair enough, and I think it is a really good place to start the discussion. And so I think maybe the way I would answer that is by talking a little bit about Muskrat Falls. And I know everyone is about Muskrat Falls. Mistake in the case of Muskrat in terms of the public process used to assess that project is really relevant to what we see going on right now. Essentially, there were important lessons we should have learned then, and we should apply in this case before we charge into another big mega project, which involves a lot of very similar issues. In the Muskrat Falls case, government fundamentally failed to protect the public interest and conduct thorough and transparent processes where it would have been possible for people to judge the real merits of the project before it went ahead. Just for example, there was no environmental assessment of the kind now at least theoretically required by federal legislation, which meant that things like the issue of methylmercury contamination wasn't accounted for in the lead up to that project. There were a variety of other community interests, for that matter, in the case of Muskrat Falls. That simply there was no forum for assessing those concerns prior to the project being sanctioned. There was no opportunity for any sort of outside or independent assessment of the claims being made by supporters of the project. And we know that they actively misrepresented facts. They took advantage of the fact the government was willing to let them say things that have turned out to be untrue. Mark Muskrat, their base and private sector interests, own personal interests were mixed into what should have been more purely, I think, public interest considerations. So, that's the lesson from Muskrat Falls. So we fast forward to the discussion of this project, this World Energy GH2 project. And in this case, the minister right from the get-go promised that we wouldn't make those kind of mistakes again, right? This is Andrew Parson. He says, we're going to learn from that. We're not going to make these kinds of mistakes. But here we are, less than a year down the road. If we just set aside for a moment whether or not we think this is a good project or not, and I think people can legitimately debate that, I think what this is support this. It's rushed and it makes mistakes that we've seen in the past. And, maybe I'll mention just a couple off the top as examples. Auctioning public land without clear disclosure of what land is really under consideration, that's not a good process. That's not a serious public policy process. That's not a way to carefully assess broad public concerns, let alone the economic value of those lands to people who are already using them and benefiting from them. Not having a proper environmental assessment consideration and environmental concerns. Like, not a good process. And I'm really disappointed that the federal government has decided to essentially exempt this project from that kind of an assessment. That should clearly be happening in this case. So again, not a good process. The piecemeal way that the public is discovering the range of public supports that are being given to this company, whether we're talking about federal tax credits, potentially low cost hydropower from NL Hydro, an airport, a port essentially for free. When it's clear the government has already decided to go ahead with this, and I think we all know the government's already decided to go ahead with this, that's not a good process. We should know those things before the decision is made to actually go ahead with the process. And I today land Labrador politics, so they're not going to be surprised to hear me say this. But of course, the relationship between senior government officials and World Energy itself is kind of unsavory, right? We needed some pretty serious independent assessments of what the public interest is here. Instead, we got trips to fishing lodges and flights on company jets. And that's not a good process. That's not how you assess the public interest in a serious way and make a careful assessment of whether this project is really something we should go ahead with. So I think that's a long answer to your question, Tara, but I think that this attitude of making decisions in this kind of slipshod way because we assume the land is kind of worthless and nature is kind of worthless, and as long as it's going to produce a few jobs, who really cares? This attitude hasn't served us well in the past. We need proper processes for evaluating mega projects like this. And what's going on right now is a pretty textbook example of how not to do those processes.
Yeah, and the Conservation Council of New Brunswick, who study wind energy projects and how to go about implementing them in communities, they actually said, yeah, this is kind of a textbook case as to how to not go about it. And like you say, there's so many aspects to this that are questionable. It feels really frustrating to be told how fair the process is when we all know it's not fair. It's not fair the way that the public has discovered it. The length of time the public has been given to respond to various aspects is not fair. And then there's the whole question of what's the opportunity cost of developing that land, for in the end, after the building phase of the project will be, a couple of hundred jobs. And I don't think we've taken the time to really cost that. Okay, so can I ask you now, Russell, do you see any benefit for Newfoundland in the current wind hydrogen energy plans? You kind of answered that.
Yeah, so it's possible there could be benefits, right? It's possible. Again, I'm willing to concede that this might be a good project that will end up being viable. But I mean, this is the question we should all be focused on. Is there a net benefit here? Is this really in the public's interest in this province? And I think it's hard for any of us to actually assess that at the moment in a fair way, because the information we've been presented with is just so incomplete. We're not running a serious process here. There's a lot of different things going on, and we're sort of getting just a drip of little to this story that make it hard for us to know whether this project is being carefully assessed or not. And I think we know it's not being carefully assessed. I think part of the reason why there's such a rush to get this project in the ground so quickly is because the proponents of this project don't want to take the time and don't want us to have a chance to know exactly what the price tag is going to be for us down the road. I will say one thing that's fairly clear to me is the response by international experts is concerning about this project. And I'm speaking here about a relatively limited set of people. The kind of people that provide investment advice on these kinds of projects have really have concerns about this project. They've essentially said they don't really think this is a very economically viable project. It's going to be an expensive way to make and transport power. And so they're kind of scratching their head, not really sure about why this project is even going forward at the pace it's going forward. I think we kind of know that here in Newfoundland, Labrador, that the story is more complicated than that. We know that the proponents of this project have a good relationship with government and know that there's probably enough support coming from the government to make what otherwise might not be a good investment for them. And that, of course, should be alarming to us, right? That's what's driving the project forward.
I feel like we've been down this road before.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's all deja vu. I do think that the potential public benefits are pretty limited here. I imagine other panelists will have something to say about this. I mean, the federal government is going to give World Energy a lot of money for this project. We're probably going to subsidize their operations, depending on what happens with whatever deal they strike to access NL Hydro's power generation. There'll be little to no royalties for the project. And the public will also have to pay the cost for remediation whenever this project winds down and is shut down. We're on the hook to clean this up. There's no fund being set aside to manage the process of remediation. And as you alluded to a second ago, there are actually very few long-term jobs being promised here. Even in their optimistic projections, we're talking about a couple hundred jobs long-term. So these are a lot of resources that we're giving this company for some pretty mediocre public benefits. And of course, there's that additional risk that if the project isn't really that good a project in the first place, and therefore will require further subsidies just to support it to continue its operations, we know how that will work. We have a lot of experience with that in this province, that the company will be back to the public looking for more money, and they will probably get that money once they're up and running. So yeah, I'm not sure what the benefits are here. I think it's really hard for us to assess it clearly, but they don't seem to be that great.
So I did notice from the environmental impact statement that they don't plan on paying corporate income tax to the province until 2041.
Yeah.
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 And then there's all the federal tax incentives, right?
Yeah, and it seems quite clear that that's what makes the project work. Without tax credits from the federal government, this project will not be happening and will not go forward. And so it seems like World Energy already knows those credits are forthcoming,
Right.
or roads already.
Okay. So you did mention the aspect of the project that the company is going to be drawing energy from our grid, because we all know that wind is intermittent. And so I wanted to ask you about your thoughts about the GNL, the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador's energy strategy, right? So it's hard looking at it as a layperson to have confidence in how these mega projects will contribute to energy security for the province when they're going to need to draw energy from our grid. And the recent revelation by NL Hydro that it's considering a new diesel-powered plant to increase its output because of the expected rising demand coming from all the projects. It doesn't give one confidence that the GNL has a coherent strategy in terms of local energy security and climate crisis mitigation. So I just wonder what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, so I think I would say two things there. The first thing I would say is I understand from most people who have engineering expertise on these kinds of projects that it was inevitable that World Energy was going to be asking to purchase hydropower off the grid, that's simply a necessary part of the project. I would just point out here that that wasn't made clear back at the start, right? That they would be looking to purchase a significant chunk of Muskrat Falls power generation. And again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier about bad process. Had we fully understood that back at the start, we might have had a little more skepticism about what exactly was going on here.
Yeah,
A sort of gradual reveal about those components of the project, they're interesting in and of themselves. I do think we finally now have clear disclosure that World Energy does want to buy a lot of hydropower. I think that's interesting in the way that you raised that about whether there's a bigger plan here or not, because I have a hard time not seeing this project as being linked to Gull Island development as well. That essentially, if I was to make a circle of people advocating for Gull Island development and people advocating for this project, it wouldn't be much of a Venn diagram. They perfectly overlap. And so I do worry that part of what's going on here is that government likes this project because it's creating demand for electricity that will allow them, having had the disaster of Muskrat Falls to come. We have side effects of doing that at Gull Island. I think those things might be linked. And again, I think that's why we need to have a serious discussion about what is going on with this project right now, because I think part of the political strategy here is to roll these things out in a way that gets us well down the decision path before it's too late to sort of go back and say, oh, wait, you know, we're gonna be using instead of renewable electricity so that we can make ammonia. What's going on there? So yeah, I think that was an inevitable revelation. The public should have been told that sooner. And I do think if there is a plan, the government's just not telling us what it is.
Okay. So you mentioned process a bit there, and can I ask Russell, just in an ideal world, let's say in a healthy democracy, how do you think citizens should be involved in decision making regarding natural resource projects?
Yeah. So that's $1 million question, and
Yeah.
that's a hard one, and it's always bad, you know, as a professor who studies these things, for me to just sit here and say, oh, that's a bad process. That's a bad process. I should be able to say quite clearly, well, what is a good process? And the thing I would say is that that's a hard thing to say precisely. There's a lot of competing interests and concerns and a lot of different theories about what is a good process of democratic engagement in these kinds. One of the big problems with these kinds of projects is that we know that governments get carried away with the momentum of delivering a project like this. And we know that they start filtering out information that doesn't support that goal. And that's a general problem, right? That's sort of well recognized. Essentially, government stops listening. But I think what's interesting in this case is that it's not a problem here that the government has stopped listening. This decision is already made. We are going to exercise that there was some sort of public dialogue about whether or not this process should go ahead. And you can't have any serious process of public dialogue and citizen engagement where we know from the outset that the decision has already kind of been made. And so I think that that's the basic first test, right? We need a real environmental assessment here. We need the federal government to actually require that. I don't understand why they're not requiring that. And we need a serious chance to have some outside people kick the tires on what World Energy is actually proposing. And if it's not possible that those assessments might result in the government rethinking what it's doing here, then those aren't really valid processes in the first place, right? We're not really assessing the merits of the project. You can submit some comments online. You know, I'm sure a lot of people listening have done that. You know, they've gone in the dialogue boxes and said what they want to say about the project, but those comments don't really connect to anything. This is not a process of serious deliberation. And so we're missing that basic framework. Without that, we're not even in the ballpark of talking about a system of democratic engagement over projects like this.
Yeah, like we're not even approaching it with this process. We're not even approaching it. And I think that, you know, so many of us felt way back in August of 2022, was it, or 2021, when the Chancellor of Germany, the Prime Minister, the Premier, and other leaders gathered in Stephenville, that we were being told something without being told something, without being included.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Yeah, you don't have the prime minister and the chancellor of another country show up if the decision isn't already largely made. That's the wrong way around. Anyway, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so thanks, Russell. I wonder if Tami and Nick have anything that they want to add to what Russell said.
I'll defer to Tammy, then I'll sweep up the mess afterwards if you want to take the first crack at it, Tammy.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Russell. My heart is so heavy today, and it's just that feeling that we're not going to be heard. It's just so disheartening. I live on the Port Au Port Peninsula, phase 1 of this project, and this is what's going to happen in literally the mountain behind my house. Sorry for the emotions, but it really hits home.
Tammy, I'd be crying too, maid, if it were happening on the mountain behind my house, you know, and I feel for you. I really feel for you and for the people of the Codroy Valley.
Yes, and I actually reached out to a person at the Codroy Valley. So when I'm given my chance to speak here, I will share their what they wanted to be said tonight too, because I would never assume to speak on anyone's behalf. And I feel like that's kind of what's been happening, is just people are speaking on our behalf when they really have no business doing so. So yeah, Russell, I really don't know what else to say other than it's just so disheartening. And we need change, guys. We need some real serious change at government levels, because with a brand new industry coming in with absolutely no laws on the books, with no project planning of any sort, it's just, we're kind of literally in the wind, if we're giving their pun there.
Yeah.
Up to you now, Nick.
Oh my, well, the fireworks are certainly going off for me here as I listen to you both speak. I suppose by way of introduction, Glenn had touched on the right pieces, but I'd just like to add that I'm joining you folks from Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador today, the homeland of the Inuit of Labrador. A very grateful guest here, trying to get down the coast and not getting anywhere because of the fog. But alas, happy to join you all. I mean, one question that Russell was really wrestling with was will there be benefits? And I'll push back a little bit, actually, and I'll say yes, of course there's going to be benefits. This is being positioned as the largest private sector investment in Atlantic Canadian history. The more important question for me is who benefits.
Yeah.
Just because this is the a 12 to 14 billion dollar project, this doesn't mean that my nieces are going to benefit, or that the Cannon family I have on the Port Au Port Peninsula are going to benefit, or the folks on this call are going to benefit. I think it's quite abundantly clear that this current model of economic development that we have benefits a very few at the top, and it leaves quite a few at the bottom worse off. So I was looking at a paper before this meeting that suggested that the top 1% of global income earners have about 57% of the global wealth. So I would suggest that these type of mega development projects will perhaps have lots of benefits, but they're probably gonna skim to the top, leave the folks at the bottom waiting. So that's one thought I had. Another thought I had as you were talking, Russell, was this idea of backing up the grid. So no company, in their right mind is ever going to start a widget factory that produces, little plastic widgets if it can't run 100% of the time. If you have a solar panel that runs 20 or 30% of the time, or a wind turbine that might hit 40 or 50% of the time, they want full output all the time in order to recoup their investment. And we know the wind doesn't always blow, even on the Port Au Port Peninsula. It's close. But it's certainly not all the time. So it has to be backed up by the grid. So in essence, we're putting additional demand on a grid that's already at capacity for a utility who's already planning their next step. So this is kind of what I call the butterfly effect of renewable energy projects. So we build a giant wind farm in Labrador, in Newfoundland, and it necessitates flooding into our Inuit lands in Labrador in order to keep powering this, which I think is a really frightening injustice as a result of these so-called clean energy projects. And I guess the last point I'll make, we were kind of discussing what is good process. And to me, a good process is process which empowers a community to make a decision and not a corporation or shareholders to make a decision. So, the provincial government had came out several years ago and said if hydraulic fracturing were to ever go ahead on the Port Au Port Peninsula, it would require the social license of the people who live there. Massive, full acceptance, broad support beyond any formal regulatory process, yet that requirement has dropped for this large scale wind energy extractive project. And I'm really curious as to why we would empower the public with respect to hydraulic fracturing, but not empower the public with respect to so-called green energy. But those are some of my early observations. I'll stop there for now.
Okay, thank you both so much. Someone has put in the chat, they've asked me to please remind folks listening that the deadline for comments to the environmental impact statement is tonight at 11:59 p.m. And you can email EA project comments at gov.nl.ca. I wonder, Glenn, should I turn it over to you? And there are other comments in the chat. Should I read those first or turn it over to you and we can get to them later?
Why don't we hear from Tami, and then we'll have some questions before we go on to Nick. So Tami, you're on the part of the island of Newfoundland, as far away from the newsrooms of St. John's as you can get. And perhaps that's significant. We know how, where the power is in Newfoundland, I guess. And I think a lot of people might not know very much about the unique history and culture of the Port Au Port Peninsula, and what it's like, and why people have been so energetic in their opposition to this mammoth wind energy plan. So what would you like people elsewhere not familiar with your home, the Port Au Port Peninsula, to know about it?
Thanks, Glenn. Well, where I live is absolutely beautiful. We have 4,600 people population. We all live along the coastline. So if you were going to come out here, you would be able to do the entire peninsula. It's one road and it goes all the way around, and you would probably be able to do that in a little over an hour. That's if you drove the whole way. You would absolutely be stopping a lot of the ways because it's absolutely majestic and beautiful. First, with so many things, we have the whales, we have the eagles, we have the osprey, that all of the birds, like, are just incredible. And we have been kind of at a point where, when we saw that map with all of the red dots that GH2 had come out with, we were astounded at what that was going to mean for us, because it couldn't possibly be that. It is going to take away the opportunity for the people who live here for generations. My family has lived on the Piccadilly area for generations now. The people here, we have businesses that we all survived COVID, and we're still up and running, which is huge. So there's over 25 businesses on the Port Au Port Peninsula running successfully. We have people that cut wood in our forests here up on our mountain for wood in their wood heat. We use it, we can berry pick there because there's an abundance of berries that grow naturally here. We hunt here. So this place has been utilized and used for generations now. The thing that connects us to the rest of Newfoundland is a little space called the Isthmus, and that's what separates us from the rest of mainland, or the rest of the mainland of Newfoundland. And so this place there is too much to lose here, and that's why we're fighting as deeply as we are. It's in our backyard, literally. This is where we get our water. Our water all comes from the mountains. So regardless whether you have an artesian well or you have regular well, it's here. We already have a big company. It's now taken over by CMEX, a mine, and they do blasting usually once a week. I've got cracks in, like, my foundation because of the blasting that was when we built the house is right behind our house. So the concern now is, of course, the amount of explosives that they're going to be using in order to put these turbines up, the kilometers of roads. We already have roads back there. The moose have made roads, and people that are going to gather their wood have made their wood roads. And this is a place where we're able to utilize and use nature, when getting back to the earth is the most important thing. And we've seen that worldwide now, how people are needing to get into the woods, in order to feel comfortable with their own mental health, their own well-being. And this is exactly what we have here and what is going to be destroyed if we don't fight this. So I got upset when Russell was speaking about things because this is so large and it's such a huge undertaking. We fought so hard. We've got some really wonderful people that have been working so hard here on the Port Au Port Peninsula that have been fighting this. And we had women going door to door for just to get signatures to ask people directly, do you want this, yes or no, or are you undecided? Those are the questions. And over 84% of the people doesn't want this here. So it's really, really difficult. We have Indigenous people here. We're Mi'kmaq people. We have, we're the French shore as well. So there's a lot of people that come from French-speaking places, France and such, and they come along the Port Au Port Peninsula. We have some really, really strong traditional, generational of people here. We need to protect this. This is not an industrial dump to be able to put all of these ginormous turbines on our mountaintops and allow us to be the first of its kind and just figure it out afterwards. Like the things that I've been hearing is well, it'll be okay. Well, says who? It's difficult to say that. And so from the Codroy Valley resident, because that's the Port Au Port Peninsula, like again, we have Mi'kmaq, we have English, we have French, we have like Portuguese, Basque. There are so many different ethnicities that live here on the Port Au Port Peninsula because this is where people come and fish. We have fisher people who have made their lives for generations here, getting their lobster, crab, scallops. There's all of it that's right here. So this is all at risk for us. The people in the Codroy Valley, wait a second now. So this is what the person had said to me, any construction activity within the Anglo Mountains will directly affect the waterways and vegetation impacting the ecosystem, including bird and fish population. It is crucial to recognize that every action undertaken in the Anglo Mountains will have a runoff effect into our valley. So it's going to be the direct impact on their estuary, which is, there are over 249 species of birds that have been identified in the Codroy Valley. These are worries, they're worries about the wetlands, what it's going to do there, and then how that's going to impact the full ecosystem in the Codroy Valley as well. Because not many people even knew, as like I had an interview this morning, and I'm grateful for the media finally having us have an opportunity to speak and speak about, you know, why we're fighting so hard here. But he didn't know that there was anything happening in the Codroy Valley. He was like, it was new to him. And I feel like that's the case because if you read the first proposal of this company, Codroy Valley wasn't included in that. So that just appeared. And there's been a lot of that appearing of new things that are happening within this, you know, as it's been going along. And nothing's even been started yet, right? We haven't gotten the okay to go ahead and start, but the port has been bought, all of that stuff. So yeah, that's a little bit about this place.
Yes. Tami, you mentioned the Mi'kmaq history of the Port Au Port Peninsula, and people might have noticed the support expressed by the Alibu Mi'kmaq First Nation and Mayabeeg First Nation, the two Indian Act bands on the island, as well as some of the community bands, the status and non-status bands. Some of the leadership of those bands have expressed their support and accepted money from World Energy through this so-called vibrancy fund, a little, I guess, financial appetizer. But most of the people, individual Mi'kmaq people, have a different point of view. What has the project done to the unity and cohesiveness of Mi'kmaq people in the what we might accurately call the heartland of Mi'kmaq culture in Newfoundland on the Port Au Port Peninsula? What has been the impact of the proposal on the Mi'kmaq community?
That's a great question, Glenn. And unfortunately, the conflicts and the divisions has made our communities worse. The biggest issue is the disconnect between the Indigenous leadership and the people that are elected to represent. Individuals meeting with this company to negotiate these deals, like really know nothing about it. They come with no expertise, they come with no experience in making these decisions that were going to impact our lives right here for decades. Most of these chiefs and councils, they don't even live here on the peninsula or in the Codroy Valley. But the simple fact that nothing, that hasn't done anything to stop the lateral violence and the disregard for the people that have so much to lose. Those are the people that are right here and in the Codroy Valley. So all we end up doing is struggling behind the accusation, legitimacy, authenticity. All of these things are coming. This is our connection to the land. This is who we are as people. This is where we do our ceremony. This is where we do our traditions. One of my elders had shared that the medicines that you need are in your front yard. You know, so it's that deliberate and that direct. So I feel like our leadership should be supporting communities that welcome the project, and then also those that don't, and have the courage to tell both this company and the government that intimidating our people, that are compromising our water, taking our women to Supreme Court, silencing our voices, and taking away our choices. These are things that are unacceptable and should absolutely never happen again. People of the Codroy Valley and Port Au Port Peninsula, we deserve better opportunities for a chance of a better life. And when it comes to deciding what that looks like, it should be up to us, not to bureaucrats somewhere else, or leadership somewhere else even.
Tammy, we got the very bad news a week or so ago that our request to have a federal environmental assessment of that project had been turned down by the federal minister. And for people not familiar with the federal assessment as opposed to the provincial assessment, it is, I think it's fair to say, a more complete assessment, although even many of the federal assessments end up with the projects being approved. So one doesn't want to overstate the impact of the federal assessment, but they do have participant funding. So rather than individual people trying to read 4,000 pages on their kitchen table and make the deadline at 11 o'clock tonight, there is at least some funding under the federal process to hire experts, biologists, researchers, whatever. So that federal request was turned down. Is that attempt to get a federal assessment, is that over, or does the struggle for that continue?
Oh, we're absolutely going to continue. We're not going to stop, guys. We can't stop. This means far too much to us. So we will not stop. But to be fair, like as Russell had shared earlier, like when you have Olaf Scholz and you have Prime Minister Trudeau show up before anything even got started, wasn't it just a trade show that they had come to and hear it all kind of, so it just kind of in that impact, it seemed a little, I think that's where people felt like, well, it's a done deal already. Well, we are very stubborn people here too, and we're not going to stop fighting. And the other thing that the federal environmental assessment would do, it would slow things down, which is exactly what needs to happen. It just needs to slow down. It's not about stopping this. It's not about make you go away. It's slowing things down. It's really important that you do and have a real plan in place for us. So, yeah, again, this is like in the middle of a residential area, guys. This is just, it's just way too big. And by having that 4,000-page document given to lay people, when you really need experts to be able to go through and share it back with people what the actual jargon means.
There may be people watching from elsewhere in the province, or maybe even elsewhere in the country, who would like to help if they knew how to help. So what can we say to potential allies out there and how they can help in our struggle to save that land?
Share our messages. That's really big for us when we are putting things out, to please share that information. Just knowing that you're allies with us means so much. We're going to have to hire a lawyer at some point or something, I guess, because that's kind of where we're at in terms of the fight that we have against us. This is not my day job. This is not what I do, but I have no choice but to do this, right? So there's that kind of necessity here. So for the allies, if they can just continue to, I don't know, just continue to help us out. And tonight, I want you to at least give your information, like what you feel about this project, and send that off to, I think it's going to be in the chat here, the email that you can send it to have your voices heard. I'm really hopeful that we absolutely can be heard, that the minister's even going to look at anything and then make a decision based on what they've heard back, rather than a few people somewhere other than these places, which is the Port Au Port Peninsula and Codroy Valley, making decisions on us, for us, is just, it's not okay. It's not acceptable. So they need to do better. This government needs to do better. And so please keep, just let us know that you're there with us, because we have enough pushback from other things where people are not understanding the full scope of what this is going to mean. Like, in part of the environmental assessment was 1,200 to 1,500 room unit that's going to be built in town, another 600 unit that's going to be built. These are all temporary housing built in Codroy Valley. And my question is, if there's jobs here, why are you building these units to house who?
Thank you, Tammy. Russell and Nick will give you a chance to respond to anything that Tammy said. But in the meantime, Peter Jackson, thanks for joining us, Peter. Peter Jackson from Saltwater, the Telegram, asks a couple of questions here. And we'll see, I'll read the question, we'll see who wants to reply. Peter asks, there's an argument to be made that its economic viability can't be accurately predicted. What existing benchmarks can one use to assess it? And secondly, world energy and political leaders have used a guilt by association tactic to discredit criticism. There are people in the region using social media and other means to spread misinformation, extreme political views, and outright climate change denial. What is your advice to those advocates who are trying to express a consistent, sound argument for better oversight? So I don't know if anyone would like to reply to Peter. I mean, I might, as someone who spends a lot of time in social media, it's hard to control who comments. You know, it's a very fluid world out there, and you know, you post something and one is somewhat surprised by comments, and even people who might support you sometimes are not necessarily people you agree with. So it's very complicated. I think that second question, but Tammy, Russell, Nick, do you have anything to respond to Peter with?
I think I could take a little stab at part one. Oh, sorry, Tammy, do you want to go first?
No, please go ahead. No,
Cool.
please go.
Yeah, so maybe I'll leave the alternate views piece for later while I chew on that a little bit. Yeah, I need to do some reflection there for sure. But around the economic viability of such a project and what benchmarks can we compare this to? I would say good luck. This is really the first project of its kind, certainly in Newfoundland and Labrador, and likely around the globe. This will certainly break the barrier for the largest wind energy project in North America, Canada, the United States, certainly. So we don't have much to compare this to. One thing that, you know, I always keep my eye on, however, is how much private dollars go into a project versus how much public dollars go into a project, to kind of get a 30,000 foot look at the pure cost benefit viability of such a project. So if we take this company at its word, and we agree that this is the largest, you know, private sector investment in certainly Newfoundland and Labrador history, it's going to be a $12 to $14 billion US dollar investment. And we know that the federal government's clean hydrogen tax credit, I forget the exact acronym, ranges anywhere from 10 to 40%, I believe, depending on, you know, where the hydrogen project fits on the rainbow of I think they're all dirty colors, by the way. I don't think green is necessarily all that better than gray, or nor is gray all that much better than blue, or vice versa. So if we say that $14 billion is, you know, gets the full tax credit of 30 or 40%, we're talking billions and billions and billions of several $billion to support the advancement of this type of initiative that's never been done before. And that's not with an M, that's with a B. And one thing I like to compare this to is if we said, you know what, we're not going to do wind energy. Instead, we're going to give a living wage, a basic income to everyone on the Port Au Port Peninsula to help them out. That would be $60,000 per person for well over a decade. That's the amount of public capital that we're pumping into this project to make it viable. So I certainly have concerns with anything that robs the public treasury in order to make a few people a little bit more wealthy. So those are some of the thoughts I have on the economic viability of the project.
One more question before we go on. Avalon chapter of the Council of Canadians asks, is there a hidden agenda on the part of World Energy GH2? Might they be after a privatizing of the Newfoundland energy grid? I don't know if there's a way to answer that question, or if anyone has anything to say about that. I could just leave that provocative question there. Let's see. Well, maybe Tara will go on and come back after Nick with some other audience questions.
Okay, let's do that. So I just want to, at this point, give folks listening and watching a reminder that you're watching a special presentation by EnviroWatch NL. This is the first of what we hope will be many public forums on issues that affect Newfoundland communities, land and water. You can become a financial supporter or an active member of this citizen-based group, and information is available, I'll say it again, on our Facebook page and our website at envirowatchnl.com. Okay, so Nick, there, I can see you.
I'm here. I'm attentive. I promise.
Yeah. And I just want to say how relieved I am that you were able to join us from Labrador today. I know you're working up there. So, Nick, I want to ask about environmental assessment processes. Okay. So are they real, meaningful processes, or are they a system with preordained results that are meant to show regulation, but not to achieve actual regulation?
Yeah, I have some pretty serious concern around the state of environmental assessment processes in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada, and beyond. I mean, I was doing a little bit of research before we hopped on the call here, and basically any major environmental disaster we can look at in a Newfoundland and Labrador Canadian context, odds are that project went through a rigorous environmental assessment process. So, when we talk about the countless, the hundreds of thousands of liters of oil that have been spilled offshore Newfoundland and Labrador over the last full decade, got an environmental approval through, a federal process or joint provincial process. When we look at the 50% of the aquaculture salmon crop that died because of extreme heat and had to be dumped and, decimated wild salmon in the rivers, odds are all of those individual processes made its way through an environmental assessment process. So one of the big takeaways that I've had in studying this is environmental assessment is not actually a tool to protect the environment. It's not called the environmental protection process. It's called the environmental assessment process. So essentially what we do in these bureaucratic processes is we dream what the potential impacts are, and then we put Band-Aids on them. We don't try to stop them. We try to come up with mitigative strategies in order to slow them down. So I really do think that this specific project, is a fait accompli, is the term I've been using. Anytime the Prime Minister shows up to shake your hand before the process is formally started, probably does not mean that it's going to be a fair and unbiased outcome. I'd also note as well that the provincial Minister of Diet, I think that's the Department of Industry, Energy and Technology, he was recently in the media on CBC in this audio documentary. In his words, not mine, this project is more likely than not that it is going to proceed. So I would say this process is not here to protect us. This process is here to support industry. 90% of projects that go through this process get blessings, and it's a way to tidy up around the edges without making dramatic changes to our relationship with the land or the way that we consume resources. So no, I certainly think that the proverbial foxes are guarding the hen house here, and I don't have a great deal of confidence in the process.
Okay, I sometimes ask myself if I'm too cynical about these things, but
No, you're the right amount of cynical.
thank you. That's validating. So, okay, so the next thing I know we want to talk to you about is you have expertise and a lot of ideas about alternative approaches to economic development that are sensitive to people and place. And you have talked about this idea of energy justice in your work. So I wonder, could you talk to us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I really have two key concrete strategies that I'd like to put forward, but maybe to backpedal a little bit on this, especially with respect to energy governance in Port Au Port or Codroy or any Indigenous region of the province. I don't position myself as the expert. I think Tami and all are the experts. I mean, as I hear you speak about your tradition, your knowledge, your culture, your food, your resources, I wouldn't last a second on the Port Au Port Peninsula. I was working in a coastal Labrador community once upon a time, and my furnace broke when it was -40 out, and I had to call the diesel plant operator over to save me. And he looked at me and he said, "Buddy, you've been studying energy for 10 years and you don't know how to clean a spark plug." So I certainly give all the expertise, to the people on the peninsula. With that said, I have read some books and I can generate some ideas from those books. So one idea that I'd like to put forward is this idea of community-based energy systems. So really what the principle here is, we don't actually need corporations at all. We don't need large-scale, resource-intensive, extractive projects. This is the way things have always been done. And I'm of the position that if we build the renewable energy future with the same extractive and capitalist values of the fossil fuel era, we're going to end up with the exact same social and economic inequities of the fossil fuel era. So one alternative that's been put forward is that of community-based energy systems. And really the key features here are, number one, deep involvement and process, legitimate power. So, you're not a passive participant, who's seeing helicopters flying over your head and trying to figure out what's going on. That's a real thing that's happening. You're in the driver's seat. You get to consent to the development. You get to make the key decisions. I mean, quite dramatically different than what's on offer right now. The second piece is communities are profoundly involved in the outcomes of projects. So, you're not getting a $10 million, I think Glenn call it financial appetizer. I would call it a tip, perhaps, on the main bill. Instead, you're a co-owner of the project. You own 50% of the thing. You own 51% of the initiative, and therefore you see 51% of the profits that are left behind at the end of the day. And the third common attribute of community energy systems are that of scale. So if you look at the definition of small-scale renewable energy in most states in America, for instance, anything over 30 megawatts does not count. That's what's considered a manageable project. That's about 10 modern industrial wind turbines. Those can be managed pretty neatly. 167 turbines exceeds that threshold by far. So deep involvement in process, commitment to localized benefits, as well as consciously managing the scale of projects and striving for decentralized systems of power instead of centralized systems of power. It's a lot of the work that I'm doing in Labrador and now in Western Newfoundland, as well as beyond. The second tool that I'll offer, though, again, us academics, Russell, we love acronyms. This one's one of my favorite. It's called ABCD, or asset-based community development. And the idea here is that instead of a corporation coming in and saying, "Oh, we have huge unemployment rates, so the economy is depressed, we're going to change your lives with this magic box," instead, community members are empowered to identify their unique cultural and natural assets and strengths, and then you build on those. So as I hear Tami talk about, the 30 businesses around the Port Au Port Peninsula, the harvesting activities, the ceremonial activities, the rich culture, you would start with those as your assets and then build out from there. And one region of the province that has had incredible success with the asset-based community development model is that of Fogo Island. So again, we had a cod collapse in Fogo, similar to the Port Au Port in terms of, exhaustion of resources. And instead of World Energy GH2 coming in saying, listen, Fogo, this is the way it's going to be. 167 wind turbines, live with it. You had the Shorefast Foundation and community members who said, what are we good at? We're good at art, we're good at hospitality, we're good at local food. And they've been able to transform those local assets into a revitalized rural economy. But I would hasten and hypothesize that had a company like World Energy GH2 had its way in Fogo Island, that Fogo Island would not be the world-class tourist destination that it is today. So I think there's a lot to learn from both community energy systems and ABCD on the Port Au Port Peninsula.
Excellent. Okay, so you kind of the third question we had for you, you've kind of talked a little bit about that already, and I have a feeling I might know your answer. So, and it's about the mega project approach to renewable energy transition as the most effective way to address the climate crisis. We've been told over and over that this project is about addressing climate change, and there's an emotional argument made about how Newfoundlanders can contribute to the world to help mitigating climate change by offering our wind resource, our world-class resource, in order to do something good for the world. So maybe we're being a bit selfish over here in Western Newfoundland by resisting it. So, I mean, what do you think? Do we need these mega projects to make?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I love mega projects. You
Yeah.
get a mega project, you get a mega. Everyone should have a mega project. Really is at the core of my scholarship. No, I'm kidding. I'm really appalled with this approach to development. I think when we put these arguments forward, that we are treating the symptoms and not the disease of the problem. So the symptoms being greenhouse gas emissions, but the disease being greed and over exploitation. Until we learn to confront the disease and come up with alternate models of resource governance and economic development, we are going to continuously run into environmental degradation in the same projects over and over. So maybe one more tool I can offer is kind of in circles of energy justice, we have what's called, the hierarchy of energy action. In the base of the hierarchy is where you always start, which is consume less. The best sources of energy are energy we don't have to consume at all. So, never mind electric cars, never mind hydrogen cars, use your feet, get a bike, live close to where you need to go. Those types of actions have the least impact on the world. The second step of the hierarchy is energy efficiency. So the idea is when we do have to deploy energy resources, we should be using them as responsibly as possible. And this project doesn't meet that threshold to me. I read a report from Carleton University recently that suggested that Newfoundland and Labrador is ranked dead last amongst Canada's provinces in energy efficiency programming and per capita spending. So again, this is just biggering and biggering and biggering while doing nothing about the disease that underlines those assumptions. And the third and final step on the energy hierarchy is localized, distributed, renewable energy sources. So yes, I know we got to keep the lights on at the end of the day, but we don't need to import hydrogen from Europe to do that. We can have solar panels on our homes. We can have a couple wind turbines locally. We can have a run of the river hydroelectric facility. But the idea is that by following those steps, consume less, use what we do use efficiently, build localized renewable energy supply, that's how we can go about building a just energy transition and not just an energy transition.
That's excellent. Thank you. And I don't think that we're talking enough about conserving and using less in the province. And one thing that was notable in the Commission of Inquiry report on Muskrat Falls was that we didn't really need that project. If we had employed conservation of energy, if we had spread out demand during peak times, there needn't have been a case for Muskrat Falls. But some powerful folks wanted a mega project. And
this idea of, I'd love to hear my co-panelists' thoughts on this, but this idea, this myth of perpetual economic expansion. I understand that we would have a very hard time today of getting a 100% electricity grid based off of renewables at current levels of demand today. Now, if we have 3% economic growth per year, compound growth, so growing on top of each other, within 25 years, the size of the economy doubles, which means you need double the amount of energy. Energy use and GDP traditionally are tightly coupled to one another. So we're not only talking about getting to 100% renewable energy today, we're actually going to have to get to 200% renewable energy in order to account for future economic growth. So I think we need to, really challenge that societal myth we have: is bigger always better, or is there ways we can live and fairly share what we have? I'll leave that question open to my panelists or anyone.
Excellent. Russell or Tammy, do you have anything to that you want to respond to Nick with?
Sure. I'd just like to jump in and say, sorry, I didn't get a chance to comment on Tammy's comments. I really appreciate the way Tammy put the people in the place in this discussion. One of the things that has really jumped out about this process to me living here in St. John's is people do not understand the scale of this project at all. This is a very abstract concern in much of this province. The scale here is unprecedented, and I think it's really useful to think about what that means if it's happening on your back door or your front door. And so I think that's really important. I also think, obviously, Nick has considerable expertise on these issues. And I agree that part of the problem here is mega projects themselves, and that a more community-based perspective would be of smaller projects would be a fundamentally better approach. But of course, the reason why that doesn't happen is that windfall profits, and I don't mean that as a pun here, but windfall profits come from taking public things, making them private for the purpose of private profits. And this project is really all about taking public things and making them the private property of these investors, whether that's the land, the water, whatever they're going to do to the fishing areas, the federal subsidies, the federal tax credits. It's public resources that are being privatized. And so, yeah, I think that's a really important context here. As Nick has said, that is the disease.
Tara, there's a question for Nick from Francis Scully. Francis asks, Nick, given the latest information on how we have now passed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, is building a massive poisonous ammonia factory not against laws protecting all Canadians from further poisoning by chemicals? And that's true. I mean, little is made of this plant being built in Stephenville with all this ammonia, which is not something you want to be, having close to your teacup. So, Nick, I'm not sure if you have any comment about that point about the ammonia.
Yeah, I really love that Francis brought up this idea of planetary limits. I'm not a natural scientist or an environmental scientist or an engineer, so I'll try not to wade too deeply into, the biophysical impacts of an ammonia spill, for example. But what I can say is that climate change gets a lot of the attention, but we're actually facing several planetary ecological crises. So new research has come out recently from the Resilience Alliance Network, I believe is the name of the organization, and a bunch of affiliated scholars that suggest that climate change is just kind of one of the 9 planetary limits that we have. And we are reaching tipping points with respect to climate change. There's others that we're in big trouble with as well, though. Biodiversity, we are in biodiversity loss. We are in the 6th great extinction of planet Earth. I understand that current rates of extinctions are over 1,000 times what the background extinction rate is. Freshwater use, land cover use, novel entities and microplastics and plutonium in our environment. So, climate change is just one head of the 9-headed beast. And if we transitioned everything tomorrow to hydrogen power instead of fossil fuel power, maybe we would make a little bit of impact on one of those 9 heads. but the other 8 heads would still be hurt by mass production and consumption, by untamed and unfettered capitalism, by the privatization of the commons. So I'm sorry I don't have anything more specific to say about ammonia, but on the point around planetary limits, I mean, we're dealing with more than one issue here, and we have to address all of them if our kids are going to have a good future, if we choose to have them.
Tammy, a question for you from Peter Jackson. Peter asks, suppose this project is ditched. Would there be a negative vibe in the community between those who supported it and those who didn't? How do you mend relations?
We're doing it now because we have family members that can't speak to one another because, one person is for it, the other person is against it. So they've agreed that they can't speak about it at all in their home. So this is a real thing that's happening right here on the Port Au Port Peninsula. So how do we mend it? You know what? We're going to go back to what we've always done here, which is we're resilient people. And as Newfoundlanders, we're going to continue to do what we've always done, and that's love this rock. And there is not another province in all of Canada that I have seen the pride that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have for this place. It calls us home when we're away, and it forces us to come back. So I feel that we are going to be just fine. There's a great majority of us that are fighting this for the right reasons, and I really believe that once people understand just the enormity of what this is, and I think that's why we fought so hard, is it's really unfathomable to understand even the sheer size of one of these turbines, and then we're going to have multiples of them, like hundreds, like over 100, like it's unbelievable. So this, having that feeling, I feel like if it were to ever start here, people would be like, oh my goodness, I wasn't expecting this. So we're going to be just fine. We are resilient people, and there will be the next thing. And you know what? We will be ready for the next thing, because none of us had an idea about what wind energy was, what ammonia plants were, what hydrogen is. We didn't know. And you know what? We've learned a lot in this process.
Question from Pharmacrate. Is there any legal recourse for the lack of consultation and lack of acting in accordance with ethical standards? Or maybe Farah, I could add a little subnote to your question. Any legal recourse to the federal minister refusing to order a federal economic assessment? I don't know if any of the panelists have any comment about that. Very often we find ourselves as when we've failed to convince our political leaders to do the right thing, having to resort to the courts, and which is an expensive proposition. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I don't know if there are any thoughts from you, Tammy, or Nick or Russell about whether a trip to the courts is in the works.
So we don't have money. Simple. It's going to be an enormous undertaking to hire a lawyer. Now we've had a lawyer and we owe money to that, and we've had to stop that right now because we just don't have the money for that, and the amount of fundraising we're having to do to pay down the bill that we already have. It's difficult. Again, when you have a government that should be supporting us, we have the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People that the government of Canada has now said yes to. We should have these opportunities, and in terms of being able to get experts to support us, we don't. I wrote to the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, and she said, sorry, you can just put your letter in with the environmental assessment statement, and that's what you're going to get. So there was nothing. We're trying, and we won't stop trying. It's not going to deter us. We really would like to see the minister call on public hearings and come directly to our communities and talk directly to us. So if you are going to write your letter to the minister tonight, maybe you can express that as well, because that's really, really meaningful and that absolutely should be done. I think, I don't know if I've answered the question well enough, but yeah.
No, it's the courts are a daunting proposition. These, I think, I don't know, Tara, if you see, I think I hope I've captured at least most of the questions.
There are a few comments here in the Zoom chat, Glenn.
Yeah.
So Francis Scully asks, Tami, have you contacted Decolonizing Solidarity and Stand Earth for support? That Francis says she suggests that you do. She's a supporter of both, and they can be very effective allies.
I will write that down. Thank you for that information. And the answer is no, we have not yet, that I'm aware of.
Okay. And there's also, as Allison mentions, there's Eco-Justice, the law organization in the Maritimes. So that, I think that's Nova Scotia, is it? Nova Scotia,
Yeah,
New Brunswick.
we have been in contact with them as well. So that's, yeah, that's an ongoing thing. Like we have many different groups that have been working tirelessly from day one of this. And yeah, we're just gonna, they've been in contact with a lot of really wonderful organizations that are really in support of our fight here.
Okay.
And then of course with you panelists as well, I really appreciate each and every one of you and your just your experience and your knowledge and sharing with all of us.
I listened to you on the go today, and someone mentioned it earlier, but I was shocked to hear that the host, Anthony Germain, wasn't aware about the wind turbine proposed for the Codroy Valley. And to Russell's earlier point about folks out in the Avalon, like most of our population is based on the Avalon, and the concern is that a lot of those folks do not seem to be aware of the size and scale of this project. And so then, you know, our challenge is to wake them up, to engage them, to get them interested in what's happening. And the Codroy Valley hosts the most important wetland in the province. And the Grand Codroy Estuary was designated a place of international significance in 1987 by the Ramsar Convention for migratory birds. It would be nice to, and they've been late getting organized, so we do hope in the future to have some representatives of the Codroy Valley to speak at other events that we may organize. But yeah, pulling in this attention from the East Coast and getting folks engaged in what's happening out here on the West Coast is crucial. And Tami, you've been doing a great job of that. People may not be aware, but Tami's been recording videos and sharing them through Facebook, and that's how we came in contact with her. And you know, you speak very eloquently about what's happening, and it's so important that we hear your voice.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that.
Yes, and Tami, I wonder, it might be appropriate, since we are 3 hours and a bit away from midnight, or 11:59 to be more precise, deadline for submission of public comments on the World Energy GH2 environmental impact statement. Now, people might feel intimidated having to respond to a 4,000-page document in 3 hours. But if nothing else, I think you know, people who respond to environmental impact statements say that you know, you should be very formal, very specific. But I think just to bear witness at this point to what is going on, and to make your comment as a concerned citizen, a human being, would be worth the effort. And it doesn't have to be fancy. And I'll just we can put the email address in chat. It's widely available on if you look online, but the email address is eaprojectcomments@gov.nl.ca, and you can submit your email anytime before 11:59 Island time tonight. So you still have a few minutes. And I believe there might be a couple of other
There are a couple of
comments here.
comments. Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, Tara. You.
Okay, so Patrick says, in response to the earlier question of what will bring the community back together again if the project doesn't go ahead, he says that some of the ideas put forward by Nick would be great to explore and would help unite the community again. Community-based and driven projects with local ownership and shared community wealth would go a long way to mend fences. And Leo says it's almost impossible to keep a government that has a majority from an undertaking. The government sees the environmental assessment process as a hoop, not a value-added process. The court is one way, extensive public opposition is another. Government will fight both. And someone, Alison Dyer, who's on our executive of EnviroWatch NL, she'd like me to mention that we are 100% volunteer, and we don't accept nor are we seeking any government grants. So we're all volunteers, and we appreciate any and all donations that we get through the website. So people can go to our website, EnviroWatch NL, and make a little donation, become a member. You can be an active member or you can be a passive member. It's up to you. Any help is welcomed.
I have
Sarah,
an
may
ask
I
as
make
well. Is that the numbers of people that are getting involved is essential. The government and World Energy GH2 narrative has been there, and it's the only limited opposition. We need that lie challenged. That there's just a handful of people that are opposed to this project. That is a lie. So we need to have our allies come together and speak loudly, and say that this is wrong. And that's what we need. We need the people on the Port Au Port Peninsula. We need the people that are directly affected, Codroy Valley and such. And for those of you who are allies, to be able to speak as well, because we cannot allow that lie to continue.
Nick, you were going to say something.
Yeah, yes. There's so much exciting there that I want to get on top of. It's this audio documentary CBC put out. Like I feel like we could do a whole session on just that one of these evenings. But again, the minister had made some comments in there that were really concerning to me, and one of them was along the lines of, these people were unhappy we did oil, and now they're unhappy that we're doing wind energy. And just to the minister, I would say, welcome to democracy. What the Keurig cups we decide to use at Confederation Building, like we as citizens of the public are entitled to weigh in on that. These are major decisions. These are multi-billion-dollar projects. And just because you put green lipstick on it doesn't mean that the public is not entitled to have a voice. So I wanted to make sure I got that out there but maybe I'll leave that critique to the political scientists in the room. And the only other one I would offer is Patrick had this really lovely comment in here I saw around how communities can heal. And I would just suggest this work is possible. There are really lovely examples in Newfoundland and Labrador of sustainable energy initiatives that are done in community. And I don't have permission from the organization to name them or talk about this, but just in theory, I'll talk about one. I worked on a community-led biomass initiative recently where almost every home in a community was converted from oil furnaces to high-efficiency wood stoves. A project that built on the local culture, firewood as ceremony, instead of taking away from the local culture. And we held a public event in a small community. 100% of the people who showed up at the event voted in support of the project. So if you put community first and you listen to them and you respond to their needs and you allow them to design their solutions, we can do really cool social and economic development work in community. Social and economic development, not social and economic growth. So I'll leave that out there as one of my final comments.
Tami, question for you, and Nick's comments are a good segue. Tami, do any residents in your area believe it will bring them cheaper power?
Yeah, and I think that's been the unfortunate part, is that people are not understanding that not one single light bulb will be lit with this huge undertaking of 164 wind turbines on the Port Au Port Peninsula, with another 164 that are toted for, or more toted for, Codroy Valley. So that is, unfortunately, guys, we are not getting any power from this. This is our infinite wind that is taken from here and going to go directly into the pockets of people that don't live here.
Kind of reminds us of the situation in Labrador, where people are very close to Churchill Falls Power, but they still have to use diesel because they don't have access to that grid. So the inequities. Russell, something that's occurred to me is whether part of the rush here is, looking at the political coverage in the paper. The current federal Liberal government is, shall we say, not that doing that well in the polls, and a change in government might or might not be in the offing. I think that's an objective observation, not to be partisan about it. That's just how it is. And I wonder if that explains part of the rush by the proponents here to get this thing through, because if there is a change in government, then everything, I guess, is up in the air. A new government will look at programs, things grind to a halt. So do you see that as a factor here?
So we'd only be speculating, right? It's not totally clear. I think initially part of the rush seemed to be around the extent to which Europe's energy crisis as a result of the war in Ukraine was creating a unique opportunity. Maybe there's a bit of a rush here in that the offer of those tax credits may disappear if there's a change in government. Yeah, maybe. But I would suggest to you that the rush is for other reasons, and I can't prove that. I'm only really speculating. But if I was to design a process in which I wanted to get my mega project approved, I would go for rush at each step, because what the company wants in this case, and the government that's supporting it wants, is for community groups to not have time to organize and to not have time to build public awareness of what's going on. And I think that's what the rush is all about. The rush is about preventing the public from getting engaged in this process in the first place.
Thank you. Tara, we have 2 minutes left. So I think we have time to mention that there are still just a little under 3 hours for people to get in their comments to the address that we'll post. And we would encourage people to make even a brief comment, perhaps referencing a discussion you've heard tonight, and your concern about the unanswered questions and wanting more time. More time is for the benefit of the public interest. So if you feel so inclined, then do get in your comment. Back to you, Tara.
Well, it's 8:59, so I'll make my last pitch for EnviroWatch NL. So you can go to our website. There's a donate button up there in the corner. You can become a member. You have to donate to become a member. It's a little bit of a confounding process. It's not that hard, but some people find it tricky. Okay. So if you need help, just send us a message on Facebook on the EnviroWatch NL page. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your time and your expertise with us. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in tonight. It's great to be with you.
And join us for our next forum on aquaculture, a very timely topic in the province these days. Look for the date on our Facebook page or on our website. Perhaps
a last comment there from the chat from Janet McNaughton. Janet says, I I think the government should consider whether this project will benefit the people of this province and the environment, because neither is clear. She learned tonight that neither is clear. Thank you.
Thank you to Russell. Thank you to Tammy. Thank you to Nick. And thanks for everyone who's watching tonight. Thanks for being with us, and see you next time. Good night.
Good night.